You're listening to Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. On each episode, we sit down with key industry experts to discover more about what's happening in the world of learning and development, from current trends and insights to the most valuable lessons learned along the way. Join us for a fresh perspective on all things training and the best direction forward.
Welcome to Learning Leader Spotlight, where we interview the learning leaders of today to help the learning leaders of tomorrow. I'm your guest host, Tracy D. Lufkin, and I'm a relationship manager with Training Pros, the sponsor of this podcast. We like to say, when you have more projects than people, let us help you find the best consultant to start your project with confidence. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Haley Harbaugh, Director of Learning at Bloom Healthcare. I first met Haley in person at our local ATD networking event last month, and after hearing her insights on L&D trends, I knew we had to have her on the podcast. She brings a wealth of knowledge about where our industry is headed, and I'm excited to dive into today's conversation. Haley, welcome to the podcast. Let's start by giving our audience a quick overview of what you do at Bloom Healthcare.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great seeing you there and being here with you today. So as Tracy D said, I am the Director of Learning here at Bloom Healthcare, and I really do a lot of different things. I'm one of those typical L&D people that wear a lot of hats. So I do everything in learning and development, including our provider education, performance evaluation, talent development. Right now I'm working a lot on revamping our leadership development programming, onboarding, as well as learning technologies. So all of the wonderful things that L&D professionals do, that is what I do. I am not clinical though, so I do have some subject matter experts that I partner with pretty frequently to help me with that provider education or that clinical education. But that's my role in a nutshell, and I've been here for a little over a year, and so it's been a really fun ride so far.
Wonderful. Well, Haley, your work at Bloom Healthcare is so crucial to an industry where continuous learning directly impacts patient care. So let's take a step back. What first drew you into the world of L&D?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm pretty typical, like most L&D folks are, where I feel like I kind of fell into it, to be honest. I have been working in L&D though now for about 15 years, which is hard to believe. And as I started in L&D, I feel like I was always really that person who was the informal trainer for a lot of organizations, whether it be retail, financial services, or now healthcare. I always somehow fell into being that informal trainer. When I started working for one of my other organizations, I realized I'm actually kind of good at creating technical training content as well. So like EMR content, how to evaluate a patient's medical record basically and audit that, and help desk material for people. And so I realized that I was pretty good at that and good at explaining that information to people. And I kept asking my boss, I said, I really, really want to do learning and development and training and development. And I remember this moment very vividly. I was sitting at a table with him, and he said, listen, Haley, if you are serious about learning and development, you need to go back to school. I had already had a bachelor's at that point, and I was like, oh, wow, I have to go back to school? Okay, that's weird. So I started investigating that and decided that, you know what, learning and development was something that I wanted to make a career out of as I started looking at different programs. And so I ended up going back to school for a master's in instructional technologies for adult learning. Really fell in love with that. And then ended up moving on and getting a doctorate of education from Johns Hopkins. And so definitely leaned all in learning and development, even though I kind of fell into it initially. But what really gives me a lot of passion in this space is being those light bulb moments, when you see that learner say, I get it now. That is so rewarding. And I feel like a lot of L&D folks that I talk to have a similar passion for it. And you're able to shift behaviors and thinking and just really leaning into true behavior change is how they want to shape their career and their life. So that's kind of my journey into it. Feel like very forceful, but also very natural, and I'm so happy to be in it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That moment when a concept clicks for someone, it's truly one of the
Yeah.
most rewarding aspects of L&D.
Love that. Yeah.
Yes. But
Absolutely.
the field has evolved so much, Haley. What are some of the biggest
Mhm.
changes that you've seen in the last few years?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I as I reflect on the last five or so years, I think it was during the COVID timeframe. I think that was when we first saw that really deep first wave of layoffs in L&D. And people having to really being forced to wear those multiple hats. I know in L&D we typically have to wear multiple hats, but I think it was much more so in that time frame. And so that was a big, big change for a lot of people who maybe were more specialized in just giving facilitation. Maybe a teammate of theirs was let go, and now they had to do LMS administration as well. I know I saw that during COVID, and that really required people to start to think about their skill set differently. So, as an example, I had mentioned that people that I worked with were facilitators, and that was their lifeblood. They love facilitation. However, during COVID, they ended up having to do some LMS administration at that point because maybe the training coordinator role got cut. And so we started to see that they were repurposed in a lot of different ways, not to mention those people who thrived on in-person uh, meetings and events now we're having to deliver this virtually. And that really took a lot out of, I think, some of those facilitators. And they had to step back and say, is this what I want to do? And what else could I be doing to emphasize my true skill set? And so we saw things like that happening and people maybe moving out of L&D and into other areas. Or maybe some people were leaning into L&D as the environment of learning and development shifted. And then I think just more recently, I think we can all appreciate the fact that AI is here. It's here to stay. And and now that we are seeing kind of this pendulum swing of more companies, more programming in person, I think we need to find this balance of like what can we be doing with AI to help facilitate those trainings and utilize it more effectively. I think about this other example with AI in the current state, how EMRs were, electronic medical records were in the beginning, where physicians didn't really quite know how to use it to have that in-person, face-to-face experience with somebody in a patient setting. And so we thought about it more of like driving the conversation versus the physician driving the conversation. I feel like in L&D, we're kind of thinking about AI or emulating AI in that similar space where we aren't quite sure how to use it in that face-to-face conversation, but we know that we need to bring it along. And so really starting to think about how are we incorporating and using AI more intelligently to help with some of those changes that we're seeing in the L&D field right now.
The days of L&D being just about content delivery are long gone. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, with AI and broader responsibilities shaping the field, where do you see the industry headed in the next, say, 5 years?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question and something really important for learning and development, as well as the business overall, to consider in the next 5 years. And so when I think about what does this look like in the next 5 years for L&D, I want to contextualize it a little bit. And so zooming out, when we think about in the next 5 years, I think one big component is that we're going to have our first generation alphas entering the workforce starting in around 2028, maybe a little bit before that. And of course, after that. But that's really going to be the first time that we have two digital native generations in the workforce. And I think that that's a really huge component that we have to think about in learning and development. The other really big generational shift is that our last baby boomers are going to be exiting the workforce in about 2031. So when we think about this in the sense of sheer dynamics, shifting how we are thinking about educating our workforces, we have to consider, okay, so now that our baby boomers are kind of on that tail end, a lot of them have already retired or they're in that last phase of their career, how are we still engaging that population and being very thoughtful about how we are educating those Gen Alphas coming into the workforce and entering the workforce? Because I think a lot of us have started to see this shift in micro credentials. We don't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree, so the Gen Alphas who are coming into the workforce may have a very different sense of what's expected for on-the-job training and how they want to be engaged in learning and development. It may not be a sit and get inside the classroom. It may not be a 4-hour module on a self-paced course. So we are going to have to really be thinking about this population and engaging them as they're coming into the workforce and almost leaning into this digital native space and having them also help innovate in some of this more technological information age that we are really going to have to be forced into as we start to see more digital natives coming into the workforce. We are going to have to be much more nimble about that and thinking about how we are serving those populations. I think a lot of times people focus on the AI piece of like the next 5 years. And honestly, like, yes, AI is going to be a big component, but that's a cost of entry. Like that is going to be an expectation for that generation that we are using AI and we are helping them use AI. And they may be teaching us how to use AI. So I think there's a lot there that is going to be rich information for us to be able to understand a little bit more about how to better serve those populations. Just understanding sheer generational shifts in the next 5 years.
Wow, I hadn't even heard the term digital natives, and so like that totally makes sense. And Gen Alpha is,
Yeah,
wow, you're right. That's in like literally in the next 5 years, and we're already
very sound.
some of those needs now though with the Gen Zers, right?
Yeah,
I've got two
that's
of them
right.
myself,
That's right.
both of my
Yeah.
sons, and being able to engage them in content that is
Yeah,
like the TikTok style and right and but
exactly.
they have the ability to really focus on content because they binge watch
Mhm.
series and series after series.
Totally.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like, what's that happy medium that we can engage them with in learning and development and staying resilient. How are we thinking in L&D about this and staying curious, I think, more than anything. How do
yes,
we staying curious about these next generations, the next few years?
I love that, staying curious.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we have this shift from kind of module-based training and, where a
Mhm.
lot of us grew up with this kind of methodical approach to training is changing.
Mhm.
So as that's changing and AI becomes more embedded and the generations
Mhm.
come up and things change, what skills or roles do you think will be most in demand moving forward?
I mean, I think, as AI is continuing to be the main component of most business, um, uh, get collaborations across different departments and how we are utilizing it, I do foresee that the traditional role of learning and development will start to incorporate more of that AI specificity. So I know we've got some of our machine learning type of roles right now and people who are more dedicated on that side. But I really see that as the AI technology becomes more sophisticated to be they're widely used by a myriad of people. I think there's going to be specialized functions to really use that. So we have our learning experience designers right now, or our instructional designers right now. I can imagine that there's probably going to be a more specialized role who are able to utilize AI in a much more um, streamlined fashion, a much more embedded fashion into the information that they're creating. And they're going to have it. So if those instructional designers today are not thinking about what does this look like in 5 years, they should be, because I think that AI is going to continue to be an expectation to be used in learning and development, whether it's script writing, whether it's, instead of spending the day in the studio with talent, you are using an AI avatar that looks like a person to read your scripts out, instead of spending that day inside of, the studio with somebody in a green room. So I think that there's that shift into the more focused AI role, that people will have to know how to use that. And then it may also will silo those other folks who want genuinely that face-to-face interaction. And so you may start to see that kind of branching almost of how we're looking at functions within L&D. And I think generally when we think about skills and learning and development, that's probably across multiple types of roles too, across different sectors and industries. But, I really think of resiliency and adaptability being the two primary skills that we are going to have in learning and development. So like I was just saying, staying curious. We have to think about what is out there? How can we be nimble? How can we continue to evolve our skill set and be hungry for change, not be threatened by it? Because it's going to be inevitable that the next several iterations of roles within L&D are going to be significantly different, likely than what they'd been in the past. It's just the nature of evolution, I think, across the board. But so those are a couple of skills that I would imagine should be cropping up more and more.
I would agree. I think AI is clearly reshaping our field. And for L&D professionals, it's not about being replaced. It's about adapting, like you said.
Exactly. That's right.
Resiliency and embracing change. Those are all key things. And we're experiencing some of that now, maybe just with the way the environment is and the landscape. So speaking of adaptation, mentorship can play a big role in growth. Haley, who has been your most influential professional mentor?
The person that actually told me that I needed to go back to school. So I had a boss and this is probably pretty unheard of, but I had a boss on and off for about 10 years throughout my career. And while I was in kind of the thick of it and reporting to this individual, I didn't really realize that I was getting mentored, or that they were a very great professional mentor, or the kind of hindsight bias that I had as I've been reflecting on it over the last couple of years. That when I was working under this individual, I really leaned into a lot of different projects, different teams. How could I get more information? How could I get the most information that I wanted? And so I'm really coming to this individual and saying, I'm really interested in, let's say, what the innovation team is doing. I'll sit with them and learn more about what they're doing, or maybe work on a project with them. And somehow within the next couple of months, I was always able to work on a project with whatever team it was that I brought to this individual. And just that ability to expand my skill set, expand my mindset, and work with multiple people who maybe had a different idea of what learning and development was, or a different interpretation of how to display content, that was it was just invaluable. I mean, I got so much from that 10 years, and I'm really credited to how I perform today, or how I think about learning and development today, and also how I develop people who maybe I'm mentoring or who I'm leading, and try to give them those same opportunities and really inspire that hunger that I had throughout my early career too. I, you know, I was always asking for different projects and being that sponge. And so I just was so appreciative that I had a mentor, whether I knew it or not. I had a mentor that was helping me soak up that information and giving me those opportunities.
That's incredible. I mean, having a mentor who guides you for that long is
Yeah,
is just incredible. It's a good thing to have. And then to
it is.
it's interesting how when you at the time you don't notice it until you reflect back on it. So it's
Mhm.
great that mentorship can be something you ask for. It can be something that just happens organically.
Right. That's true. That is true. Yeah.
So learning from experienced professionals is key, but staying informed is just as
Mhm.
important. So Haley, where do you
Mhm.
turn for the latest L&D insights?
I would say I have probably like 3 that I really are like my go-tos. So when I have downtime, I'm kind of looking at their sites or looking at their content and trying to figure out like how can I stay ahead of the curve. One of those is ATD. So I spoke for the org dev conference last year that they put on, and I was when I got there, I chatted with some of the organizers, and I was just blown away at the sheer amount of prep work that they did. So everybody has to submit a proposal in order to speak at those events. But what we don't know is all the behind the scenes prior to those proposals being submitted, that they're looking at, okay, what do our attendees actually want to be learning about? There's some deep research happening year over year to understand and maybe project what attendees would want to learn about. And so I just love that ability to pull, individuals who may be attending or maybe previous attenders. I just love that research angle that they're taking to make the conferences much more impactful for the people attending. I love that aspect. The other group that I find a lot of really great content with is the Chief Learning Officer group. And I just feel like they always have such relevant content. I feel like they are a great resource for that. And they're always trying to adapt their content to make sure it's relevant to the audience. So a great example. So I think we've all seen this shift in the narrative around DE&I over the last several months, and they had planned on having a DE&I panel. I think it was last month in February, and because of a lot of the narrative that they saw, instead of having that kind of standard panel, they sent out an email to their community and they said, hey, we understand that there is a shift in how DE&I is being perceived right now. Let's have a frank and open conversation about that. And so they actually shifted how they were looking at that panel. And that just makes so much sense. And that just kind of shows that adaptability piece, how we're able to shift and how we are thinking about content and really absorbing it. And I think the last one that I really use from a data perspective is a group called Lightcast. They do a lot of data analysis based on job descriptions that are out there and looking at the industry skills. I think it's going to be really important as we consider, again, the next 5 years, the next 10 years within the workforce and how we are approaching skills development and being a little bit more thoughtful about what skills do we have today versus tomorrow? What do we need for tomorrow? And they do such wonderful data analysis on skills development, the current skills of various industries. I just love what they're doing out there. So those would be my 3. I think that are my go-tos when I need some additional information.
Excellent. Those are fantastic resources. I wrote down Lighthouse because I haven't heard of that one, so I'm going to check that one out. Um,
Cool.
so basically, the learning never stops, right? And great leaders also learn from great books. So if someone
Mhm.
aspires to move in,
Mhm.
leadership, what's the one book you recommend?
Oh, hands down. Every single time somebody asks me for a recommendation for a leadership book, it is a book by an author named Erminia Ibarra. And her book is called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. It is one that I go to time and time again. It is wonderful for beginning leaders, transitional leaders. It's actually a book that I used to teach a course last summer at Johns Hopkins about imposter syndrome, because we know that comes up when we're moving into leadership. And so I have leaned on this book so many times, my own leadership transition. And this is actually the book that I can remember very vividly. I was on a work trip and I was reading this book, and the light bulb went off that this was the book that told me that I needed to go back to get my doctorate. It just had such a profound stamp on my thought process related to leadership. It really informed a lot of how I am today and how I show up too.
That's an excellent choice. I need to go back and reread that. Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Yes. Yes. I think it's about stepping up, right? Thinking differently. And that book, offers great insights around that.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Haley, thank you for sharing your expertise today. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Before we
Thanks
wrap
for
up,
having me.
yes, of course. And before we wrap up, I want to express my sincere thanks in a meaningful way. And as a token of our appreciation for being on the show, Training Pros will plant 5 trees in your name. Our charity initiative.
Thank you.
We have a charity initiative that was focused on planting trees around the world. And to date, we've planted
Oh,
over 4,200 trees. So we'll be adding
wow.
5 more in your honor and sending you a
Love it.
certificate so you can see where they're growing at. And it's just a small way for us to say
Thank you.
thank you for your time and the value you've shared with our listeners today.
Yeah, that is so awesome. I love that gift. Thank you.
You're welcome. So with
So
that,
wonderful.
we wrap up this episode of Learning Leader Spotlight. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review.